Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to do a video on Google Sign-In, which is going to be very similar to an application I did or a video I did not that long ago on Facebook Sign-In. In fact, it's going to have the same user interface. It'll look like this. And what we'll do is we'll have a button that logs you in using Google, takes you to a home page, which is going to grab your image URL, your display name from Google, put that on the home page, and then you'll have the option to log out. So to get started, you will need a Flutter project, you will need a Firebase project, and you'll need to connect the two. I will put a video link up at the top here to get you started with that if you need a little bit of help. And once you're set up with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I have created my Flutter application. I have created a Firebase project. I've linked the two, and I booted it up, and I've gotten this Flutter demo app as I might expect. So from here, what I'd like to do is go to the Firebase Console. Let's do everything that we have to do there. Then we'll go to pub.dev, grab the packages we need, fire the project back up. We'll build a dummy UI. Then we'll build a block with all our business logic. We'll connect it to our front-end logic, and we'll be done. All right, so let's go to Firebase. And if you followed the instructional video or know how to hook this up yourself, you went ahead and built a project, and you may or may not have added a debug certificate, and you will need to do that in order to log in with Google. So if you didn't do that, go to your Android app, and we need to add a SHA certificate fingerprint right here in order to be able to log in with Google. So we need to go to a terminal, and there is a little question mark you can click here that says see this page that has the actual instructions. So what we need to do is to run this command down here. So this is the command for Mac/Linux, and this is the command for Windows. I am on a Mac, so I'm just going to grab this. I am going to put it in my terminal. And it's going to ask me for a password, and the password is Android. All right, so I'm going to get a SHA certificate right here. And this is the fingerprint that I want to put in there. So we'll stick it right in there and save it. Now, this is a debug certificate, so you can run this while you're in debug. If you go to actually publish this application, you need to add the production certificate as well. And that you're going to get when you create an app on the Google Play Store. You're going to get this key, and the key is actually going to produce a SHA certificate of its own. You can actually get to it from your Google Play panel. But when you do go to production, make sure you do that, or else your debug is not going to work. All right, with that in place, if you just had to add that, you need to re-download your Google Services JSON file because it didn't have the debug certificate in it before. So I am going to hit this download here. And once I have that downloaded, I'm just going to delete the one that I have in there already. And I'm just going to drag this one into the Android app folder so it sits right there. All right, and while we're in here as well, we also need to make sure that we have enabled Google Sign-In on our authentication panel. So click on Authentication, and let's go to Sign-In Method and make sure that Google is enabled. If you're enabling it, you'll also need to put your support email right there and save it. And once you see that's enabled, you're good to go there. All right, so we can close down the panel at this time or shrink it, and let's head over to pub.dev and let's grab the packages that we're going to need. So you should already have Firebase core there. I'm going to stop the project just so we're not totally messing it up by adding things in here, but we are going to add Google Sign-In. So it's Google_sign_in. So I'm going to go to installing. I'm going to grab the current version for that, and I'm going to put that in after my Firebase core. All right, I also want to grab, while we're here, I want to grab provider. So we're going to use that for our state management. All right, we'll grab that latest version there. We are going to need Firebase Auth. And I also want to grab a package called Flutter sign-in button. So it's this one right here. And what this has is the pre-configured buttons for all of the major third-party auth providers. So that will just allow us to create a button that is styled in the fashion of whatever, well, Google in this case, but whatever federated provider we're using. And at least in the case of Google, and then when you go to Apple, if you're submitting these to the Google Play Store or to the App Store, and your button is not on brand, they will reject it. I have gotten, I've been part of organizations that have been rejected for buttons that didn't look exactly the way Google or Apple wanted them to. Let's see. That should be enough right there. So we should be all set with packages at this point. We do need to go ahead and just authorize some permissions for the Google sign-in. We're all set with the Android side. When we did the debug certificate, that takes care of the permission aspect. But there is a requirement for iOS for Google sign-in. So I'm just going to go back to that one. All right, here's Android integration, and then iOS integration. We need to add this, add or append this CF bundle URL schemes. So I'm going to go to Xcode, and I'm going to look in my info plist. I'm actually going to open it as a source code. And I'm looking to see if this CF bundle URL scheme already exists, and if it does, there should be an existing array, and I just want to add this string to it. But because it doesn't exist at all, I'm going to actually grab this whole thing here. I could take the comments too if I wanted to, and I'm just going to paste it inside the closing DICT tag like that. Now I do need to replace this value right here. So I don't necessarily want the comments. I'll take those out. But what we need to do is we need to go to our Google Services info plist, and we need to replace this value with the reverse client ID. So we'll go here, Google Services info plist. Here is this reversed client ID. That's what we're looking for. I'm just going to copy that. Bring it back over here to the info plist and replace this, and be real careful that you get the whole thing and paste it in there like that. All right, and with that, iOS should be all set. We can go ahead and close Xcode at this time. I'm going to go ahead and restart my project and just make sure that we have not broken anything. All right, so that's looking pretty good on Android. I would be looking for some red gobbledygook here to tell me that there was any problems with the packages. Not seeing any. I'm going to go ahead and just boot it up on iOS there as well. Not seeing any. I'm just going to boot it up on iOS as well, just to make sure that our setup is complete there. All right, so there it is running on iOS. Again, I don't have any red gobbledygook down here, so I'm going to take that as a sign that we have completed our setup successfully up until this point. So now I'd like to actually build the dummy interface, and there's going to be two screens to this app, the login where you enter, and then the home page with the profile pic on it. So I'm going to go into the lib folder, and I'm going to create a folder in there called screens just to keep things organized. And in screens, I'm going to create two files. I will create home.dart. And in there, I'm just going to set up a stateful widget called home screen and import material. And then I'm going to create another file in screens called login.dart. And again, I'm going to do another stateful widget, but we'll call it login screen this time, and also import material.dart. All right, so staying in the login screen, the UI here, very simple. We just want to put a button in the middle of the screen with login for Google. So we'll take out the container that the IntelliSense gives you, and we will replace it with a scaffold. I don't really need a app bar here, so I'm going to skip right to the body. And the body is going to be a sign-in button, and that's a package that we imported. And we're going to pass it buttons dot, and this is going to give us some options. I might have to import buttons. Let me see. From Flutter sign-in button. All right, so this gives us all the options that are available for federated providers. So I'm going to choose Google since we're doing Google this time around. And it takes an onPress method. I don't like the way it's not giving me onPress. There we go. I think I ended up with an errant import. So make sure you've got Flutter sign-in button as your only import other than material. I think I ended up pulling in some package. So right now, we just want this to go to the home screen. Eventually, we'll want this to trigger the sign-in logic and let that go to the home page. But for now, we can do a anonymous function and go to Navigator of context, and we will push replacement. And that is going to be a material page route. We'll give it a builder and context inside there, and then the context will finally go over to that home screen like that. All right, let me format that up so you can see that all in one place. So to put that on the screen, let's go back to main.dart. Let's just get rid of all this class my home page. So we'll keep the my app, but we're going to get rid of everything from there down. We'll hit enter, and we want to change the home page. We don't want to go to the my home page. It doesn't exist anymore. We want the home page to be the login screen like that. And go ahead and restart that. And I do want this to be in dark mode as well. So why don't I get rid of this here? And we'll do brightness, dark, and I think you need primary color instead of swatch when you're in dark mode. That should be all set there. What do we got? Build function, return null. Let's go back to our login screen, and yep, I forget to put a return in front of scaffold like that. All right, so we got a real ugly sign-in button. It's just kind of expanding itself all the way up to the screen. So let's go ahead and put the sign-in button inside of a column. So let's wrap that with a column. And that's going to put it up in the top left. So let's also wrap the column with a center, and that should give us a button right in the middle. And then to make it vertically centered, we want to add a main axis alignment to our column. So let's go main axis alignment, main axis alignment dot center. There we go. All right, so now we click that, it takes us to our home page. So let's go to our home page and actually put something on that as well. And here we want basically the same thing. We want that button, but then we also want a profile pic and a text with our display name. And so we want the basic structure the same. So we'll return a scaffold and with just a body. And let's just go ahead and do that column here with children like that. And I know I want that to center up, so I'm just going to wrap my column just like I did before with center. And so for children, I'm going to want a text that says display name, and we'll replace that with the actual display name. We'll want a roundish picture, so for that, I'm going to use a circle avatar widget. And we'll give that a background image, which is a network image. And so that's just going to take a URL. And for a placeholder, I am going to go to a website called Fillmurray, FILLMURRAY.com. Am I? Let me Google it. Fillmurray. Am I spelling Murray wrong? Yes, I am. FILLMURRAY. And Fillmurray is a website that has just fill pictures of Bill Murray, and the pictures will rotate. So you might get a different one depending on the day that you go in. But what I want to do is I want to grab the COM picture, and I'm just going to, at the top there is the dimensions. I'm going to fill it so it's 300 by 300. And this is the picture I'm going to get. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in there like that. And we can see Phil Murray up here. We haven't done our main axis alignment yet. In fact, let's do that now. So do our column here. Above our children, we can do main axis alignment. Main axis alignment dot center. All right. So that's not a very big image, so let's go ahead and change the radius of that to around 60. There we go. All right, and then below that we want another button, which will be a sign-in button. Even though it's going to be a sign-out button, we're going to use our sign-in button package. And we'll give it buttons dot, and this is where we need to import our Flutter sign-in button package. And just like before, we'll do Google, and there's an on-press, but there's also a text property to this package, and we can say sign out of Google, I guess we can say. All right, and then there's an on-pressed. And we're going to do the same thing. In fact, I'm going to go to login, and I'm just going to copy the on-pressed because I hate typing that. And we're just going to bounce it back to the login screen like that. All right, and that should bounce us back to the sign-in. And actually, let's go ahead and do just a little bit of styling here. So let's add some spacing here with a size box with a height of 20, just to give a little space between the display name and bill. And then below bill, let's give it some good space here. So we'll do a height of 100 with a size box here. And that'll just create some distinction. Display name could definitely be bigger, so let's add some style, and we'll do a text style widget with a font size of 35. Beautiful. And so that is pretty much our UI. We're going to need to weave in some of the back-end logic or wire it up once we have it. But we're going to keep the visual separate from the business logic, and we're going to do the business logic in a service class, and then we're going to create a block to be the intermediary between that service class and the front-end logic. So I'm going to build a service for interacting with Google Auth, and so I'm going to create a new folder called Services, and inside Services I'm going to build myself an Auth service, which I'll call Auth _ service.dart, and that's a class of Auth service, like that. So I can bring in an instance of Firebase Auth. So I'll call it a final _ auth, and that is Firebase Auth dot instance. And inside here, I'm going to want to definitely be able to log in, and I'm going to be logging in with a credential that I get from Google. I'm definitely going to want to log out. And I'm also going to want to get a stream of the current user, and that's what I'm going to use to flip the pages. We're going to be listening to a stream which will have our current Firebase user, which will start out null because they're not logged in. But once they're logged in, that stream will pass down a user. I'll know that they're logged in, and we can move them to the next screen. And then when that process happens in reverse, goes back to null, I'll know they're logged out, and I can respond to that. So let's start with the sign-in function. So when we're going to get a future user credential, and I'm going to call that sign in with credential. And this is actually a pretty generic function that you can use across all auth providers. So you might get a Facebook token, you might get a Google token, an Apple token. The Firebase has a way to convert that into a generic auth credential, which you can then pass to Firebase. All right, and that is going to be auth. Can I do it down here? Auth.signin with credential, and I just want to pass in that credential. Okay, that is signing in. Signing out is pretty easy. That's a future as well. But it's a future void, and I'm going to call it log out, and I'm just going to call _auth sign out, like that. So that's my sign in, my sign out. Now my listener, or my stream, is going to be a stream of type user. It used to be Firebase user. It's now just called user with the latest changes to the package. I'm going to give myself a getter, and I'm going to call this current user, and that is just going to be auth state changes, like that. So whenever we log in, this stream is going to return a user. When we log out, this stream is going to return null, and we can respond to that in our user interface. So that's our service. Now we just need a block to sit in between our screens and our service. So I'm going to create a new folder in libs called blocks, and I'm going to create a file called auth _ block.dart, and that is a class called auth block, like that. And I'm just going to fix that because I spelled it wrong. All right, so in here, I want to bring in an instance of my auth service. I'm also going to want to bring in an instance of the Google sign-in package. So we'll do final Google sign-in. And that is equal to Google sign in, like that. And this is going to take a scope. So this is going to tell Google exactly what you're asking for. And we're just going to ask for the email address. You can ask for more here. There's some documentation on the scopes you can ask for, but the more you ask for, the scarier the permission message is going to sound. So only ask for what you absolutely need. And so in here, I want a function to log in. I want a function to log out. And I also want to be able to access that user stream that we created with the service. So I'm going to create a stream of type user. I'm going to set up a getter, and we're going to call that current user. And that is simply going to point to auth service.current user. So it's really just a pointer at this value in the auth service. But we don't want to be reaching into the block and the service. We want the block to be what stands between our screens and our service. So we're going to set this up here like that. All right, so let's create ourselves a login function. We'll call it login with Google. It's going to be some futures involved here, so we want to set this up as asynchronous. And this should be wrapped in a try catch. So some of the others, such as Facebook, Apple, they have a switch that you have to do. You'll get different responses, and some of which are error responses, and you have to set up switches that respond to all of those different cases. Google's not like that. If it errors, it's going to throw an exception, and so we want to set up a catch block to catch that. And I'm just going to print the error if we get one, like that. So this try block is where we want to do most of our logic. And so we'll start with a final, which is a Google sign in account. And so we'll call that our Google user. And so this is going to be the result of awaiting Google sign in like that. So this is going to be where the page pops up. We sign in with our credentials, and we're going to get a Google user back. From there, we want to get our access token. So we can do that here with final Google sign in authentication, and we'll call that Google Auth. And that's the result of awaiting Google user.authentication. So essentially, this is who they are, and this is what they're authenticated to do at this point. So now we can take this, and this is where Firebase turns it into a generic auth credential. And we'll call that credential. So we'll call Google Auth Provider credential. And this is going to take an ID token, which we will get from Google Auth ID token. And then it's also going to take an access token, which we will also get from our Google Auth. And when we get that credential back, that's what we can pass to Firebase. And a lot of people ask me when I did this on the Facebook one, what if you don't want to deal with Firebase? Then at this point you have an ID token and an access token from Google. You can do with that whatever you want. It is easier, I think, to turn around and pass this off to Firebase, and then you've got, kind of like a nice management system for your auth. But this here is Firebase sign in. And so this will give us a result, and that is gotten by awaiting auth service.signin with credentials. So this is a call out to our service, which is generic. It doesn't necessarily care what we're passing in as long as we've gotten it to an auth credential type, which is the work we did up here. We can pass it off to Firebase, and it will know what to do with it. And that's it. So I'm just going to actually just print there's result, and then inside result is the user object, and then there's display name, email, all of that stuff, photo URL. Okay, that is our login function. So just the last thing we need to do is also to write a log out, which is super simple. We just call auth service.logout. Could you reach directly from your screen to authservice.logout? Sure, but what we're gonna do is create a single instance of our auth block with our provider, and that's gonna be our connection to all of our business logic from the UI. So to get ourselves access to this auth block and to just have the one instance of it running, we want to wrap this whole widget tree with a provider. And I'm going to do that out here in main.dart. I'm going to wrap material app with a provider. And we're going to call create, and we are going to create context, and we are just going to spin up an instance of our auth block from there. And it looks like I'm getting an error in my auth block on current user. All right, I'm just going to reset. I'm just resetting the state, and it went away. So that must have just been a timing issue. All right, so now if we hook this sign in with Google, it should sign in with Google, and we put a print statement for the display name. So we should at least be able to see that in the debug console. So on our login screen, we have on pressed, we have got this going to the home screen. So let's bring in an instance of our block, and then let's call our sign in with Google operation. So let's do final auth block equals provider of context, and that should be inside my build. And what we're looking for there is of type auth block. Also need to import that. All right, so then on my button here, instead of Navigator and all of this, I want to be sure I get all the right amount of parentheses. I want to call authblock.login with Google, and I do want the parentheses here because I actually want to call the function, so make sure you get those on there. And then if we click sign in with Google, let's see, he wants to use google.com to sign in. I'm going to say continue. I am going to enter my Google info. In fact, maybe I'll do that off the screen. Okay, and then I've entered my password. I'm probably going to get all kinds of two-factor authentication going on here. No, I must have done that already. So now here in my console, I can see my name. So this is communicated to Google, and it has got back the credential information. So we've done that step. So what we want to happen, of course, is when we actually do log in, we want this to go ahead and take us into the home page. And if you use a stateful widget and you do all your logic here, you can just call Navigator right here from the widget. But when you've outsourced your business logic to a block or another class, then what you want to do is create a listener and have it listen to the stream and then respond to that event. And we set that up here in our auth block. We set up this listener for current user. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to set up a listener to this current user event on our login screen. And when we get a result, we're going to go ahead and pass it on to the home page. So we're going to do this in init state. So when we init the state of this widget, we want to go ahead and set up a listener. So we'll bring in an instance of our auth block inside here. We've got one in the build method, but we also want one here. So provider of context and of type auth block. And anytime you listen in init state and disposed, you also want to set this up so your listen is false. And that's because init state disposed, these only fire once, and there is no purpose in actually listening to the changes on that provider. You're just basically using it to identify the instance of the auth block that you have in your widget tree. And in fact, if you don't put listen false, you will get an error. So it is required to declare that you're not actually listening to this block. All right, so on our auth block, we should have, there we go, a current user object right there. And so that's a stream, so we can listen to that stream. And we're going to get back a Firebase user from that stream, or null. And so when we fire up an event here, if FB user is not null, so that means they have successfully logged in, this is when we want to take them and send them off to the home page. So this is when we want to do Navigator, push replacement, exactly what we had here before. And I'm going to be lazy, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to copy this here and paste it right in there and replace it with home screen. Make sure I got all my parentheses. And so we're already signed in with Google. Now, we missed the boat on this init state because this widget's already fired up and we didn't have this init state in place. But if you hit hot reload and you're still logged in, it should instantly bounce you to the home page like this because init state fired. You are already logged in. You haven't logged out. And so this fired and the Navigator was called and it pushed it to the home screen. So that's exactly what we want it to do. Now we want that to work in reverse on the home screen. So let's go to the home screen. In fact, let's copy our init state here, come over to the home screen, and come inside our state class and paste that sucker in there. Do the imports that we need to. Save ourselves a little typing. And of course, we don't want it to go to the home screen at this point. If they log out, we want it to go to the login screen. And actually what we want is if the Facebook user is null, that's when we want to send them back. So they've logged out, the Facebook user is now null. We want to bounce them back to the login screen at that point. Now let's also hook up our button. So down here at the bottom, we have a navigator to the login screen. We no longer want to do that. We want to call our auth block. So let's bring in our auth block up here in the build method. So final auth block equals provider of context and the Type we're looking for is auth block. And so we have our auth block, and we have a logout function. And we want to make sure we get the parentheses because we actually want to kick off that function as well. All right, so when we click this, it should sign us out. This listener up here should be listening, and it should get the word that FB user is now null and bounce us out of here. And of course, just like before, we missed the boat on a init state because we haven't, it wasn't there when we built it. So we can now sign in. All right, and now if I click sign out, it should take me back to sign in with Google. Okay. Now I'm in. All right, so one thing you may notice down here is if you bounce in and out, you will get this error about unhandled exception, find ancestor state of type was called on null. And what's going on there is you are setting up listeners and you're never actually stopping them. So every time you come into a page, you're listening to this user here, and when you leave, you're not actually killing that stream, and when you come back in, you're trying to listen to it again. So you're just kind of piling up listeners on top of each other, which is not good for memory to begin with, but it can also cause some errors down here, which are not fatal. The thing still works. But you are getting warnings down here in the console that bad things are happening. So what you can do is set up a subscription to this listener, and when you leave the page, you can cancel that subscription so that you are not tying up resources in the background. So to do that, you can start in the home page. Doesn't matter. We can do a stream subscription here. And that's going to be of type user. And we'll call it login state subscription. And we'll just need to pull on that type from Firebase auth. And so you can actually set this listener equal to login state subscription equal like that. And if you're setting it up, I mean, that's part of it, but you also need to dispose it. So let's call the dispose method as well. And in the dispose, so when this widget goes away, we'll do our login state subscription cancel like that. All right, so that will clean up the resources when you leave. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to go to my login, and I'm going to do the same thing. We'll set this equal to that there. To bring in Dart async for that to work. And then I'm just going to go back. I'm going to copy the dispose method. Not that it's horrible to type, but why not? All right, and with that, if you do a hot reload, you clear everything out, kills all those subscriptions you left out there. Now you should be able to sign in multiple times. All right, now I sign out, I sign back in, I sign out, I sign back in. We don't have these errors piling up here in the console. So last thing we need to do real quick is just knock out Bill and put our own profile picture there, and also put our name up here on the screen. So that's our home.dart screen. And we have a streaming user in the background, so why don't we go ahead and just wrap the column with a stream builder. Okay, and that stream builder is going to return us a user object. And our stream is going to be auth block current user, like that. And if we have not yet gotten the user, let's go ahead and return. So we'll say if not snapshot.hasData. Then we'll just return a circular progress indicator like that. So that covers us if there's no data yet. But if we have data, then we have this display name here. So let's get that out of there. And instead of display name, let's do snapshot.data. And these are the properties we have to choose from because we have told the stream builder that you're getting a user class back. So we're going to put display name there. And then in our network image, instead of hard coding this URL, we can do snapshot.data. And we can go to photo URL. And we save that, and I see me. I see my picture. My picture is blurry. And what you can do to fix that, in fact, if you want to print this, you can see, say like right here, if you print snapshot.data photo URL like that, you'll see it down here. This is the URL for the image. At the very end, there is this size property which says S96. There are other sizes available, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace S96 with S400. So I'm going to do a replace first method and say, okay, S96, go ahead and replace that with S400. And if I save that, you'll see my image get much, much crisper like that. All right, so we sign out, we sign in, we briefly get a spinner. It's too quick to see, but then we get our display name and our display image. So that is it on Google Sign In and how you can grab the properties off of your Firebase user from there. I think I'm going to do another video shortly on Apple Sign In because if you are submitting to the App Store and you are using Google Sign In, you are required to use Apple Sign In. And again, I've been part of groups that have been rejected or had their app rejected by the App Store, by Apple, because they didn't include Apple Sign In as well. So look for that in a future video. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video. Thanks for watching, and I hope we see you in a future video. It's going to have the same user interface, as a matter of fact. And here comes Marco. Hey, Marco.